Welcome to Have Roots Will Travel. My name is Lisa Elvin Stoltari, and I am a genealogist and a passionate traveler. We have been exploring Les Filles Mariées since the beginning of this year. We're on episode 34. I can't wait to explore more of these amazing stories about the marriageable girls. These are the ones that came before Les Filles du Roi, which is my other series that I've been doing. But before we begin, let me show you ways you can support the channel. The first three keep you in the know: subscribe, like, and notify. The next three are ways to help the channel grow. Coffee, which is a one-time donation. Patreon, which is a monthly subscription. And also, we have Super Thanks, which you can give to any video that you choose. And also, on my website, Have Roots Will Travel, I have a PayPal button if that's your choice. So for those of you who have contributed and helped me along, I'm so grateful. And when I get a letter or a comment that it's made a difference, that's why I'm doing this. Not only to help and honor all these women, but also to help you all. I don't profess to be the expert in all of this, but I do the research. I try my best, and it's a very short and sweet kind of biography, but it gets things rolling, And I love when you give me insight and corrections or whatever. So please feel free to do that as well. And with that being said, let's get to know our episode number 34. Les Filles Mariées was not a program. It was just about 262 girls, ladies, who came to New France by themselves. They didn't have 90 other girls coming. They simply took a chance, and usually they were sponsored. They came across on a boat, obviously, and they were sponsored, and they with their obviously intent to marry, and almost all of them did. And they are, if the Filles du Roi are the founding mothers, these are the founding grandmothers. Sometimes their stories are incredible in terms of what they withstood, and sometimes they're very tragic. And because this was a very, very intense time. This was a time period in which rules were not always the same as what you and I would consider. So Les Filles Mariées really can be applauded for being the the real pioneers on so many levels. Let's get to know the pioneer that we're looking at today. Her name was Francoise Duverger, and this is episode 34. This is a viewer request. I do not have her in my files, and her story truly was profoundly affected me. So let's go and start telling it. So Francoise was born in 1636 in Paris, France, under the parish of Saint-Sulpice. Her parents were Jean-Jacques Duverger and Suzanne de Laval. The Church of Saint-Sulpice is located in the 6th arrondissement. It's only slightly smaller than Notre Dame, and thus the second largest city in the city, the second largest church in the city. Construction of this church, which was the second, began in 1646. So obviously Francoise was baptized under the church beforehand. So that's pretty amazing. She would have been there when they built the church, and she would have been about 10 years old looking at it. The 6th arrondissement of Paris is also known as Luxembourg. It's in reference to the seat of the Senate and the garden. It's situated on the rive gauche of the river, the left bank of the River Seine. It includes world-famous educational institutions, as well as some of the most famous monuments. And it includes the historic districts of Saint-Germain-des-Prés, you've got a lot of intellectual and very artistic, and this is kind of like the heart of Paris, if you will. So it's kind of interesting to know that she came from that deep-rooted kind of culture. So it's interesting to know as we explore her life. Her mother's death, she and her sister Suzanne came to New France with Marguerite Bourgeois aboard the Saint-André and arrived in Quebec on the 29th of September, 1659. So the groom that she would select and who would select her, his name was Simon Galbrun. He was born in 1635 in Villain-sous-Malicorne in France. His parents were Philippe Galbrun and Jeanne Blanchette. He comes from the region of France known as the Pays de la Loire, and it is found inside the Pays de la Loire, the département is Sarthe. The church that he would be baptized is the Église Saint-Germain, which dates from the 15th century. And this on the bottom is the left side. On the left side is kind of modern day Villain. Sous means underneath, Malicorne. So it is definitely a picture perfect little town. So Simon would sign up for the Grand Recru. What was the Grand Recru? It was, Montreal was dying and they needed to really populate it. And so what ended up happening is Paul Champagny de Maisonneuve went to France, recruited Marguerite Bourgeois, and kind of signed up 100 people to come and kind of make Montreal, and so they did. Thank God for that. And so he signed up, and he received £60 a year. He also received a signing bonus of almost £100. And when he decided to stay in New France, Maisonneuve gave him £500 and a land grant. So this was quite an enticing opportunity for him. So he came in 1653. He did his time. So by 1656, 57, he's free to marry, and all he needed was a bride. So on the 18th of November, 1659, he and Francoise were married in Montreal. So let's talk about where the family settled at Montreal. We talked about the fact that Montreal in 1653 was on the verge of extinction, and so this was what saved it. And Simon Galbrun was definitely a part of that, saving of Montreal. He was, as much of a, pioneer and a founding father as you could get. He would sign up to be for the militia that Champagny would establish just for the island, and he was there. He was definitely someone who wanted to be part of things, and you could see it. And he did, and he was definitely someone who wanted to make a difference. Now we see in the 1666 census, we see Simon, Françoise, Jacques, Simon, who's 5 years old, and Marie, who's 2. And then in the 1667 census, we have Simon, we have Françoise, who's now lost 10 years. I mean, this is amazing. Jacques, she's now 20 instead of 30. Jacques is 6, Marie is 3. They have one tête de bétail, which is like one head of beef, and 20 arpents. So they have about 18 acres of land. They would end up having 4 children. Jacques Simon, we do not know what ended up happening to him. Marie would marry Jean Comparaison and had 1 child who would make it to adulthood. Jean-Baptiste would die in infancy, and Catherine would marry Jean Ayotte and have 6 children, 5 of whom made it to adulthood. Here we have a sudden death of Simon. He was found shot to death near his home and was buried on May 20th, 1669. It was said that a man named La Liberté had accidentally killed him. Françoise would remarry. She married a man named Jean Boulet de Leveille, born we don't know what year, in a town called Épinay-sur-Orge in France. His parents were Michel Boulet and Mélanie Serra. He is actually from the Île-de-France, which is part of Paris, in the suburbs, if you will. And it's situated about 17 kilometers, 11 miles south of Paris. And it overlooks 3 rivers. The main church in Épinay-sur-Orge is l'Église Saint-Leu Saint-Gilles. And this is the church where you see on the right hand is the church where Jean would have been baptized. This town is first mentioned in a 9th century document. So we know that it has been there for a very long time. And it's interesting that both Francoise and her second husband come from essentially Paris. She came from Paris and he came from the suburbs. Married on the 29th of June, 1671. What's interesting is that as of January, they took out they made a contract as of January. So she was essentially engaged to him from January on. Francoise would face the law. A day after her second marriage, Francoise gave birth to a child who was stillborn. Francoise decided to bury the child near her home. She did this because she said she believed that since the child was already dead and not baptized, he couldn't be buried in a cemetery. By July, a month later, Francoise was arrested. She was accused of killing her child and burying her child to hide the evidence. She was also accused of the murder of her husband 2 years prior. It was said that she and the man La Liberté had been having an affair and had plotted together. The man had long since fled the country. She was found guilty and sentenced to be hung at Cap des Diamants and to be on display for the public to witness as a cautionary tale. So you can imagine that this is truly, we don't want to pass judgment, but the odds are that this was just a gossip and this was just something that, had happened and people making, pay. When I read this, I was like, this can't be true, and it was also the morality of the time, So this is part of what she had to fall victim to. One last desperate attempt, Francoise claimed to be pregnant to avoid an execution. She was examined and found to be not pregnant. She was hung on November 16, 1671, and her body was thrown in the town dump. Her children would receive half of her estate, the king would receive a quarter, and the Hôtel Dieu de Montréal would receive the remaining quarter. Just a tragic loss. Now we move on to the resources. And one of the resources that I love that has inspired me is Maple Stars and Stripes. It's a podcast, and she has a blog and all of that, a website. Please have a look at that. And even if you just do one podcast, I'm pretty sure you'll be hooked. She has truly inspired me. So Sandra Goodwin, she is one of my idols. So thank you to Sandra, and please have a look at Maple Stars and Stripes. So this is the very first time I've had a fille du roi or fille mariée who had this kind of ending. So it was very traumatic for me to read about it. I was angry at the miscarriage of justice. I was angry at her persecution over things. And it was clear to me that certainly they took a little tiny bit and ran with it. And I don't know what happened to her husband, what happened to him. I wasn't able to get any information on that. Certainly, if you are a descendant of this very brave and tragic woman, please let us know, because we want to make sure that her life is honored. And certainly the viewer who requested it, I don't recall who it was, but certainly they are a descendant. And as I said, she had 64 descendants as of 1729. So the line has continued. So at least we have that. We have her contribution to New France, and also just the victim, and her tragic life certainly was an example of how life could turn on you in that period where women did not have any rights. So we thank Francoise, and we bless her memory, and we are ever grateful, and we are very sorry. I am very sorry for what happened to her. So I also want to make sure to thank my patrons and supporters. Thank you all for helping me tell the stories that I'm telling. I think they're important. I think we need to honor them. And thank you so much for all your kind words and support. It means the world to me. So until I see you on episode, I guess it'll be 35 of Les Filles Mariées. Au revoir.